Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to be doing my September wrap-up. So we're going to talk about everything that I read and DNF'd in the month of September. And as per usual, there's a number of things that we need to get through, and I'm going to try really hard to not have this be a super long video. So we're just going to jump right in. And the very first thing I finished was Ruby Fever by Ilona Andrews. So this is the sixth book in the Hidden Legacies series, or the third book of the second trilogy of the Hidden Legacies series. And this is an adult paranormal romance / urban fantasy that posits a world where 150 years ago a serum was created, and when humans took it, they either died, they became a monster and then they died, or they gained magical powers. So even though the serum ended up locked away, it turns out these magical powers can be passed down to your children. It's genetic. So fast forward to present day Houston, and there are many magical families kind of running the show. Enter our main character of Catalina, and she is the head of her house, aka her magical family, and she is also in charge of her family's private investigation agency. And in this book, there are a lot of very strange, potentially very bad things that are kind of all happening at the same time. And Catalina is forced to navigate all of them. And the story goes from there. So I'm going to start with talking about this as a paranormal romance, because that's generally how it's marketed. And what I will say is we definitely had all the elements that you would expect from the third act of a romance. We have Catalina, who has been working through like all the unknowns of her magic, but she's discovering some that are making her a little bit on edge, and she's got to work through that. We have our love interest, Alessandro, and he has from the very beginning been in pursuit of a particular person to exact revenge against them, and he's got to decide, like, how important is this revenge to him? Is it more important to get revenge, or is it more important to like keep his relationship intact? So we've got all of that kind of stuff, and they have to resolve this before they can move on and grow into the next stage of their relationship, which is a totally normal third act romance kind of thing. It's a really normal structure. However, what I will say is that even though we had a lot of the plot elements that you would expect from from the third act of a romance, we didn't have a lot of the buildup around those elements. So how it was written, it really wasn't building up the tension as you would kind of expect. I really didn't feel that we were ever in any danger with this, like that something would happen to this romantic relationship. And when we got to the end, like we got to that, what was supposed to be a release of tension, and there was like no tension to release, which was a little bit disappointing. And I will say that that release of tension was also kind of written in a way that it wasn't built up, so like it would have been disappointing even if there was this buildup of tension. It wasn't great, to be perfectly honest. So if you're looking at it purely from a romance perspective, this is a so-so kind of book. However, if you're reading book 6 in this series and you're reading it purely for the romance, you've missed a huge chunk of what makes this series so good. What makes this series great is all the urban fantasy elements, and they are so strong in this series that I actually feel really uncomfortable calling this a straight paranormal romance. It is a paranormal romance, but it also is an urban fantasy. This world is amazing. It is so well fleshed out. We have really interesting plots, great characters. Like, everything about this is such a good urban fantasy, and this is a great ending to this series. So like a lot of things had to be wrapped up. There were multiple storylines, there were multiple like things being hinted at that we needed to have revealed. We had a lot of stuff to do in this book, and I think it was handled really, really well. And not only was it handled really, really well, but like those reveals were so good. There were definitely some that I guessed, but there were some that I didn't. And there were these amazing scenes that like made me wish for popcorn. I enjoyed so much about this book as an ending to this series. And additionally, I also really, really like Catalina as a main character. Alona Andrews writes really great, highly competent females. But the problem is, a lot of their females tend to feel kind of same, like the same kind of character, the same kind of subcategory of highly competent female. But Catalina is actually different than that. We finally get a different kind of highly competent female, and it was just really enjoyable to watch her story. So yeah, I loved this. Like I said, if you're looking at it just from a pure romance perspective, it's not great. It's not amazing. It's fine. But like as the end to an urban fantasy series, it rocks. And I ended up giving it 5 stars. And then I picked up Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. And this is an adult contemporary novella. And I don't know who the translator is. It was translated from Japanese, but I don't actually know who that is. My apologies. I'll try to leave it linked down below. But so like I said, it's an adult contemporary novella. We're following our main character, who is a convenience store worker and is also very definitely written to be autistic. I don't know that it's ever said on page, but like we've got a lot of the signs of an autistic person. But essentially, she's been working at this convenience store for a really long time, like more than 15 years. And she decides that maybe she should move on from working at the convenience store like so many of her coworkers have done before her. And the story goes from there. And this book, I actually DNF'd at page 30. It was nothing against the book. It's just that this really drove home the point of why I don't pick up contemporaries. And it's mostly because there's a lot of things that will draw me into a story. But the one that's like generally doesn't happen quite as often is loving the characters instantly. I might love the world, I might love the plot. Sometimes I love the characters instantly, but a lot of times not. I do eventually get to the point where I like the characters, but I like having all the other things to focus on in the meantime. And with contemporaries, they ask you to care about this situation and care about these characters without anything else. And I'm like, but I need something else to focus on first. And so what I found was that I thought it was pretty boring, especially because I didn't care about this main character. So I got to page 30, I put the book down, and then I just never really wanted to pick it back up. So I went ahead and DNF'd it. And then I read The Gentleman and the Thief by Sarah M. Eden, and this is the second book in the Dread Penny Society series, which is an adult historical romance series. And in this book, we are following our main characters of Anna and Hollis. Anna is a music teacher by day and a thief by night. And Hollis is a gentleman by day and part of a secret society by night. And one of the things that's been going on is that there has been this huge uptick in things getting stolen around London, and it's being blamed on the street children. So Hollis is very interested in catching this thief, only to find out that it's Anna. And in the process of finding this out, they also uncover some other illegal activities that are going on nearby, and they decide to look into it. And the story goes from there. And what I will say is that this is a proper romance, so there is no sex. And as with the first book in this series, I found that to be incidental. There was so much plot going on that it really, I didn't really miss the sex scenes at all. And that might also have something to do with the fact that there's no religious overtones to this book. That's always like something that I worry about when I find a book that specifically is like, no, this has no sex, is that there's going to be religious overtones. But there really wasn't. They were very much into each other. They didn't have a lot of like impure thoughts about each other necessarily, but they were very clearly interested. They just had a lot of other things going on with like trying to track down these thieves. So I didn't have any issues with that aspect. I thought that the secondary storyline, besides the romance, in this book was not as strong as in the first book, which was unfortunate. Like, it was fine, it just wasn't as exciting. I did like the characters, but again, not as much as the first book. And I think I liked Anna a little bit more than I liked Hollis. Hollis was just kind of bland, honestly. So just kind of overall, I found that this book was good, but it wasn't as good as the first book. I still enjoyed it very much. I will absolutely continue on with the series, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. And then I picked up Vengeance in Death by J.D. Robb, and this is the 6th book in the In Death series, which is an adult science fiction murder mystery series where we're following our main character of Eve Dallas. Eve is a homicide cop, and in this series, each book we're following her on an interesting case as she tries to solve it. And I have a very interesting relationship with this series because I read a huge portion of the series many years ago. I got up to somewhere in the 20s. And then I just didn't read them. So I thought, okay, if I want to reread it to kind of get back into the series. And as I've tried to reread it, this series is no longer for me. I really didn't like book 1. I thought 2 and 3 were okay. I didn't like book 4. I DNF'd book 5, and now I have DNF'd book 6. So I DNF'd this book at page 10, and there were two main things going on. The first and foremost is that Eve is a cop, and she is trying to get criminals to confess to crimes that she believes that they committed. And there's a certain amount of gray area that she is working within that makes me more and more uncomfortable as time goes on. So she is trying to force this confession, and she's not doing anything illegal, but it is very much a gray area that she's operating in, and I'm just not really comfortable with that at this point. I still was going to push through and see if I could enjoy it, but then the killer called in, and it turns out he's a religious fanatic, and I said, no, I'm good. And I just went ahead and DNF'd this book, and I have now DNF'd this series. And then I picked up The Green Witch by Erin Murphy Hiscock, and this is a nonfiction book that is a beginner's guide to how to be a green witch. And really, I picked this up on the hopes that I could find some information about connecting with nature and maybe some rituals or ceremonies that I could perform to kind of ground my spiritual side, because I'm a little bit adrift at this moment. And what I found was that you really have to believe that everybody, everything has energy, has an aura. And if you believe that, this is an amazing beginner book. It covers so many great basics and gives you a lot of good rituals and information and just a really nice place to start. I especially loved the fact that this author is accepting of technologies and different kind of beliefs about the place of technology. Like, she doesn't shame people for like using a microwave for some of their spell work. Like, I really, really appreciate that. But I don't believe in energies and auras, and unfortunately a lot of this stuff is so mixed up with this idea of energies that I really struggled to even pull ceremony kind of stuff out that I could use, because it was so linked to this idea of everything having energies. So it's a good beginner book if you believe in energies and auras. I don't. It wasn't for me, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then I picked up The Brightest Fell, and later in the month I also picked up Night in Silence, both by Shauna McGuire. These are books 11 and 12 in the October Daye series. So the October Daye series is an adult urban fantasy series, and in it we're following our main character of Toby Daye. And she is half fae, half human, and a knight in the fairy realms, and she is usually called upon to solve odd problems because she's really the only one that has any qualifications to solve these weird problems. And in The Brightest Fell, there is a very powerful pureblood fae who comes to Toby and says, "Go find my daughter." And Toby says, "No." And then the very powerful pureblood fae takes two members of Toby's household captive and holds them to force Toby to comply. So Toby says, "Okay, fine." The story goes from there. And then in Night and Silence, basically somebody who is close to Toby is kidnapped again. So Toby has to go track them down. And the story goes from there. And we are going to start with The Brightest Fell. And this is a really great book in this series. So it does a lot of really interesting things. There is one character who Toby's talked about a little bit, but we haven't done a ton of anything with them, and this is their book, and it's great because we get more depth to their character. We're finding out more about this character as Toby is, and their relationship develops, and it's really, really interesting. We also get some really interesting smaller level reveals that I know are going to be important later, which is another good thing about this book, that the reveals we get and the details and things that we're getting are, and even some of the plot threads, they're being laid down now for later books, and it was really interesting to see that. I really think that this is a well-written book, and it's a good book in this series. However, it's not a personal favorite because that pureblood fae that comes to Toby, I hate them with a fiery burning passion. They actually aren't a huge part of the story. They show up in the beginning at one small part of one scene in the middle, and then again at the end. But I hate them so much. And between my hatred of this character and just an absolute gut punch of a scene at the end, there's just a lot of feelings that I have from this book, and I don't it's a little bit overwhelming actually how big these feelings are, and I don't know how to properly deal with them. So this is such a good book, and it's just not a personal favorite. So I ended up giving it 4 stars, but that's not reflective of the quality. That's just reflective of my personal experience. But it was still, for the most part, it was very, very good. And I would very much recommend it, although not starting at this book. Start at the beginning. And then I picked up Night in Silence, and it's really hard to talk about this book because this is a big reveals kind of book. We get massive, consequential reveals in this book, and it's so fascinating to watch it unfold. And we get to the end, and it's one of those things where you're there's a bunch of interesting ways that we could go with this. And so it's really, really good, honestly, and it feels like it kind of breaks open this world in a really interesting way, and I love it, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. And then after that, I picked up In the Ballroom with the Candlestick by Diana Peter Freund, and this is the 3rd book in the Clue Mystery series trilogy, so 3rd and final book in the Clue Mystery trilogy, which is a young adult murder mystery trilogy. And this is, it's based off of the Clue board game, and it's essentially, we're following 6 teens as they are at a boarding school. And in this particular book, we're coming up on the end of the year. It's prom is going to happen soon, and yet again a dead body shows up, and they have to figure out who done it. This is actually a really interesting book. And what I will say with this trilogy is that you should read all of these books pretty close together for 2 major reasons. The first is, in this 3rd book, there are callbacks to the previous 2 books. not to like minute details, but to like medium-sized details. And if you're like me, you start to lose some of those medium details after a while. And so those callbacks aren't going to hit as hard. They're just not going to have the same impact. But also, I think that this is going to excel as a book if you read this trilogy as one continuous storyline rather than individual books in a trilogy. Because what I will say is that the plot of this book is weak. It does not stand well on its own. If you look at it as a third act of a story, it's very good actually. But it's not its own independent. It doesn't do as well as its own independent book. Some of it, okay, so the thing about this trilogy that you should know is it's a little bit trashy reality TV. Like that's kind of the vibe that I was getting from the previous two books. And it definitely had that vibe in this third book, but it also felt like it stepped over, it's always over the top, right? But it kind of stepped over the line into like soap opera territory every once in a while, which I didn't really appreciate. Like I didn't think it was necessary that we did that. So ultimately, like, it didn't quite stick the landing. That's what I will say. As like a third book, I think that it closes out the trilogy nicely, but it's not its own independent thing. There's a couple of issues that I had. It didn't stick the landing. However, like the homages to the movie are so, so good. And genuinely, I just really enjoyed this. And again, as the third act of a storyline, this is awesome. It did a really good job as that. So I had some mixed feelings. However, this is like, I don't know why, but this is so perfectly for me that I ended up really, really enjoying this book. And I gave it 4 stars. And then I picked up The Kinsman Universe by Ilona Andrews. And this is adult science fiction romance, and it's a set of 3 novellas. It's a Silent Blade, The Silver Shark, and A Mere Formality. And this was interesting. They're all set in the same universe, the Kinsman universe, and this is interesting. I'm going to be very critical of this, but I will say on the upfront, I think Ilona Andrews' quality of writing is just very high. So like I am going to say a lot of critical things, but I did enjoy this, generally speaking. But it really drove home the fact like that a lot of their stuff, Ilona Andrews' stuff, feels kind of samey to me. You get a very competent female lead opposite a kind of douchey alpha male. And that's it's like variations on that for a lot of their books. That's kind of, we got variations on that in like all 3 of these books, honestly. So, which I did not necessarily love. Now, I also didn't know going in that these were all kind of romance novellas. I thought they were more science fiction and less romance. I would have adjusted expectations, but like romance novellas just aren't really my thing because there's frequently not enough time to develop the emotions to the point where I believe it and feel comfortable with it. And the thing that that really struck home with these 3 books is that we just didn't have enough time or space to get into the details of the world building. And that's really unfortunate because Ilona Andrews really shines in creating these very interesting, intricate worlds that are just, they're so good. And we just didn't have time to get into them in these books. So it's interesting and it's good quality, but like for them, it's probably one of the books that I like the least. But I still gave it 3.75 stars because I still think it's good quality and I still liked it. It's just like probably my least favorite thing that they've done. So yeah, 3.75 stars. Especially if you like science fiction romance, it still would probably be good for you. It's just not necessarily my thing. And then I picked up the Love Con by Cerestia Glass. And this is a contemporary romance, and we're following our main character who's been a contestant on this this reality TV competition for cosplay. And she gets to the final round, and it's a surprise. They have to have a partner for the next round. And when it gets to our main character's turn to decide who her partner is going to be, she chooses her best friend, which makes sense. But she says, it's her boyfriend, which does not. And so now she and her best friend are going to have to pretend to be boyfriend, girlfriend for this film crew. And the story kind of goes from there. I DNF'd this at 25 pages. So first and foremost, I just didn't connect with the writing. I'm not really sure what it is about the writing, but it just wasn't working for me. But then also, I really didn't like the fact that our main character, felt like pressure to say that this was her boyfriend. So basically there was a judge who was kind of making a big deal that it should be a romantic partner, but our main character up until this point had been effectively pushing back against this judge until it gets to this one part where it's like it has to be a romantic relationship, and then she buckles. And I was like, I don't actually believe that. And then the other thing I didn't like was that the best friend was like, I'm going to show the main character like that I am the best boyfriend and she should actually truly date me because he's always had a thing for her. And I'm just like, no, because like, why didn't you communicate this with her like years ago? And like, no, that's not how adults should be. So I got a little bit hung up on those things. And honestly, because all of this happened within 25 pages, I was just like, no, I don't think this is going to be for me. And I DNF'd it. And then the last thing that I picked up was Battle Royal by Lucy Parker. So this is an adult contemporary romance, and we're following our main characters of Sylvie and Dominic. Sylvie was a contestant on a baking reality TV show where Dominic was the judge. And they immediately just rubbed each other the wrong way, got on each other's nerves. Fast forward 4 years, and now Sylvie has been asked to be a judge on that same competition show, working with Dominic. And they have bakeries that are across the street from each other, so they're competitors there. And oh, by the way, they're both competing for a contract for a wedding cake for a royal wedding. And so they are very much rivals, and sparks fly. So I loved this. So one of the things that I really appreciated about this is that we had very mature main characters that were mature in a couple of ways. First, they were communicative with each other. They actually talked to each other, which is really nice. And also they were very accepting of their feelings. So instead of being like, oh, I couldn't possibly be in love with him, it's more like, why am I in love with him? I don't understand this. Okay, it's been too soon. It's that kind of thing where they're just they accept that they're in love. They just don't get it. And I actually really, really appreciate that. I also really appreciate that Lucy Parker actually took the time to explain some of those plot devices. So they have bakeries across the street from each other. That's a terrible business decision. It's very clearly a plot device. But again, Lucy Parker took the time to explain it. And so Sylvie is basically I would never have done this, but it had a fantastic kitchen, and I can't find that kind of kitchen somewhere else, and I can't afford to put in that kind of kitchen anywhere else. So if I want that kitchen, I have to be across the street from another bakery, which I'm like, thank you. Thank you for explaining your plot device. So I really appreciated that. It also has a very, very solid secondary storyline. So it's not just romance. There's a lot of stuff going on with the baking competition show and the bakeries and this royal wedding contract that they're competing for. There's just a lot going on. Now, one complaint that I have heard is that there's too much going on. There's too much secondary plot, which if you're coming in strictly for a romance storyline, that's all you want, then yeah, it's probably going to be too much. For me, it was perfect. I really like solid secondary storylines. I don't like it to be just a pure romance. So this was great for me. But I mean, I can see the complaint because when we got to the ending, pretty early into the ending, we had already wrapped up all the romance stuff pretty well. And then the rest of it was wrapping up all the other storylines. So just know that going in. And then the other thing that I will say is that this is not enemies to lovers. It's misunderstood rivals to lovers. I mean, they've just got a really bad first impression of each other, and they only saw one side of each other. And then as our story goes on and they start to interact in different ways and see each other in different ways, it blossoms more into love, right? And it's kind of subtle, and especially because Lucy Parker does not spend a ton of time developing that out. And so if you don't see what's happening, it's going to feel very, very sudden. Like they hated each other and then all of a sudden they love each other. But like for once, I was actually one of the people who kind of saw what was going on. So it worked really, really well for me. But this is probably the best romance I've ever read. Like it worked so well for me, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. But that is it. That is everything that I read and DNF'd in the month of September. If you have any thoughts or feelings about any of the books that I read this month, please leave me a comment down below or let me know what you read in September. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to, and until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!